Photographic Composition, Lecture 1, Introduction and Overview, Part 1. In 2007, a print of a photograph similar to the one above, 99-cent 2 diptychon, by Andrus Gursky sold at Sotheby's for over $3.3 million. At the time, it was the highest price ever paid at auction for a photograph. 4 years later, a print of another image, Rhine 2, by the same artist, was sold for over $4.3 million. 99-cent 2 diptychon was made in 2001 as a diptych or two-part work in an edition of 6 C prints from photographs taken in 1999. Each print is almost 7 feet tall and 11 feet across. Gursky's method at the time was to make original images shot on 5 by 7-inch film, which would then be scanned and manipulated digitally for as long as a month before having them printed by a high-end commercial sign printer in his native Germany. Gursky's annual output is generally no more than around 10 photographs a year, in editions of 6 or so, and at sizes comparable to that of 99-cent. At the beginning of the 20th century, photographers were fighting for respect equal to that given to painters and sculptors. It's clear that in the 21st century, photography has arrived, both financially and aesthetically. What are we looking at, though? It would appear to be a scene completely familiar to just about anyone as a typical late 20th, early 21st century retail establishment, the likes of which can be found in most reasonably prosperous countries in the world. But in order to arrive at this particular result, a series of decisions had to be addressed. At what point in this huge space should the camera be placed? How high from the ground should it be raised on its tripod? What focal length lens should be used? Should the film plane be parallel to the aisles or on an angle? How much of the image's frame should be the ceiling take up in relation to the aisles of products? Should there be people visible? How many? Doing what? And where should they be doing it? At what time of day should the film be exposed? Regardless of whether the process is relatively slow and methodical, as it likely was for Gursky, or just one of a series of exposures made in the blink of an eye, these are questions that must be considered by photographers virtually every time they press the shutter. When asked why the early 20th century French photographer Eugène Atget was considered a great photographer, Garry Winogrand, also a great photographer, replied, "He knew where to stand." At their most basic, all photographs are determined by where the photographer has chosen to place him or herself in relation to their subject. This can be affected by a myriad of external conditions, some predictable while others are not. At the same time, the photographer has a number of choices to make: whether or not to move the camera at the time of exposure, which elements to include in the frame, what focal length lens to use, set at what ISO, aperture, and shutter speed, whether to deliberately under or overexpose the scene, and at what depth to set the focus. What radical thoughts must Atget have had running through his head when he decided to place his camera in such a way as to have this scraggly, leafless tree block his view of Notre Dame? But is the image of Notre Dame? Or is it of a very specific time and place that includes everything visible in its frame with no hierarchy? In Atget's visual world, the tree and the cathedral are equals, each of which helps define a three-dimensional world in a two-dimensional photograph. There are many areas of specialization under the broad heading of photography, each of which utilizes the medium's principles in different ways to accomplish its goals. Individual images will often fall into more than one commercial category. In addition, much of this work may also be considered fine art, regardless of its original intentions. Experimentation with the techniques and aesthetics associated with one specialization are often applied to other specializations, and shifts occur. Add to this the constantly evolving technology, and you have a medium under constant change. This can be terrific for one's creative spirit, but it also demands vigilant attention to what's happening to stay current. To some extent, the categories listed here are arbitrary, their distinctions in many ways vague, but studying them will afford us opportunities to look at how cameras are used from a wide range of vantage points. Animals. Given the huge interest in exotic animals and the great numbers of people who photograph them in the wild, both professionally and for personal reasons, it's difficult for a photographer to stand apart from the herd, as it were. One such photographer is Nick Brandt, who has developed an impressive body of work that is instantly recognizable. Shooting almost exclusively in black and white, he uses long telephoto lenses with their apertures set to large openings in order to keep the depth of field shallow, thus throwing their background and foreground out of focus. He's also acutely aware of how the light falls on his subjects. But what really sets Brandt's images apart is his willingness to track these animals until they reveal some unique behavior, as in the case of this elephant in the process of picking up fine dust in his trunk and throwing it over himself, creating a dramatic cloud. To heighten the drama, the photographer then darkened the sky by a process known as dodging and burning. Automotive. Compositionally, the image above would appear to be only marginally about an automobile. Yes, it's in the foreground, but it's been relegated to the corner. So much more of the image is occupied by what one might refer to as background. Take away the car, though, and you'd be left with a pretty picture of a southern European beach and resort towers. The tones have been deliberately muted in such a way as to allow the car to blend in. One could say that the photographer has been dismissive of his subject. However, the opposite is true. He has trusted that its exotic appearance, coupled with the implied action of its angle in the frame, would demand the viewer's attention. One additional thing to consider: car and beach resort may have never actually come together except in the photographer's mind and computer. As Photoshop and 3D modeling have advanced, the need to transport cars to far-flung locales to photograph them at great expense has virtually vanished. Cityscape. For those of us who live in large cities, it can seem that all one can see in any direction is man-made. The horizon and sky become theoretical phenomena. German photographer Michael Wolf has been observing this condition for most of his career. While some of his images contain layer upon layer of anonymous walls that run from edge to edge of the picture frame, others, such as this one, offer views into individual homes and offices where the activities of life go on. By keeping all the verticals parallel through the use of lenses designed to shift up and down, the architecture remains neutral, a convention of architectural photography. And by choosing to shoot as daylight fades, warm lights in random apartments come on, illuminating their interiors and inhabitants. Event. Anyone who has been to a wedding in the last few years has probably noticed that photography of the event was conducted differently than in the past. Lineups of stiffly posed family members, bridesmaids, and groomsmen flanking the not-so-happy couple have been replaced with groups of people acting up, acting out, and generally having a much better time. Adopting the style and modus operandi of photojournalists, photographers now prowl weddings and other similar events in search of moments that will later be reminiscent of what it felt like to be there. Even in the more staged lineups like the one above, participants are urged to go a bit wild in order to make looking through the resulting albums and online portfolios fun instead of drudgery. By the way, just because it looks like fun doesn't mean it isn't hard work for the photographers. Fashion. Following the end of World War II, Vogue, Harper's Bazaar, and other magazines of the day returned to looking for new ways to interpret their stock in trade, fashion. Photographers like Richard Avedon and Irving Penn led the way with a surprisingly wide array of responses to assignments, borrowing stylistically from every category the medium could offer. The photojournalistic feel of the hugely successful publications Life and Look were pillaged for ideas, and from them came wild results like Avedon's image of the model Divima, seen here and addressed by Dior, with elephants at the Cirque d'Hiver Paris. A high fashion model in a couture outfit with elephants? What a crazy idea. And what an influential photograph. Avedon has captured an unexpected choreographic grace between model and animals. Note the black edge running around the edges are shadows of the film holder that kept the original sheet of film in place. Some photographers choose to include them as an indicator of their process and to help frame the image.